Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and as always, I'm joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton. Folks, this is a very special remote broadcast that we're doing with our special guest of the evening, First Air Marshal Mr. Nelson Ward, who brought this topic of conversation to our attention. It is one that we've all seen in television shows, you know, those police dramas and what have you, in which they sit there and they talk about the ability of the police to just sit there and commandeer your vehicle for whatever police duty it is. And, you know, it's just something that is so pervasive in popular culture that we're starting to think of it as something that is just a normal part of society. We don't question the constitutionality or the legality of it, and I think that's something that we need to clear up for the general public, because if there's one thing that we have always been dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it is basically empowering you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, with a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. It's as Jeremy and Nelson have said before, that without your rights, you're left with nothing, and that's one of the beautiful attributes of our Constitution. And it's part of the reason why our Constitution is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the entire course of human events. It's just one of those things that cannot be ignored. But Nelson, why don't you go ahead and take away a little bit with what you are wanting to focus this on, because there's a particular case you have in mind.
Yes, a few days ago here in Arizona, a place, I called this place into the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, and a deputy was dispatched to a convenience store where a naked woman was creating a disturbance. That's funny enough as an own, but a sheriff's deputy showed up to the scene, and she proceeded to steal his vehicle, his emergency vehicle, and took off. Which that's funny enough right there. Then the deputy commandeered the vehicle and chased after her at speeds of over 100 miles an hour in a private vehicle, not licensed to be an emergency vehicle and belonging to a private owner, which is about as illegal as you can get. Because under Arizona law, there is no posse comitatus. You must, under direction of any law enforcement agent, lend assistance, but you don't have to surrender any of your property to lend assistance. So, you know, it's both a joke and a crime, because for any sheriff's deputy to allow his vehicle to be stolen, especially by the person that was a perpetrator you're being called to apprehend, yeah, you're pretty much going to lose your job.
Yeah. And that makes sense, because one of the rights that we have is the ability to keep and hold property, and that includes personal property. A vehicle will be considered personal property, what we call in legal parlance personalty. And in many states, they consider it almost to be the same as the curtilage around the house or even the house itself. It's one of those areas that is given heightened protection. And so if the police are certainly engaging in something that was brought about by their own failings or their own negligence, that would be something that would certainly open them to civil liability, but it would bring up laws, certain criminal acts such as carjacking or grand theft auto, one would think.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. This would be. It, how many times have you seen a movie where, on a police chase, the police officer, his car has been disabled, and he jumps into another car, or is in some kind of foot chase and jumps into a car, telling the people to get out of the car, even at gunpoint. In the laws of Arizona and most states, your car is the same property. You have the same privacy in your car if you do your home. You have the right to defend that property. Most people think that you can't use deadly force to defend your property. In certain circumstances, every state, in fact, the Supreme Court has ruled that you do have a right to defend your property in which you reside or are traveling. So, thus, if a emergency officer was fire, police, hospitals, EMT,
ambulatory, whatever.
Yeah, we're trying to commandeer your vehicle without your consent, especially presented deadly force to you. You have more than enough legal means to defend yourself. So he's doing it at the risk of his own life. Somebody tries to take your, and especially to the point that you may damage that property. Now, here in Arizona, you must lend assistance, even to the point that if there's an injury where places where such as out in the desert, there's places where you have a 4-wheel drive, an ambulance can't get to. The police, state or county, has the authority to order you to render assistance to the point you take that person to the nearest hospital or nearest place an ambulance could get to, and you must do that under law. You can be fined. That's fine, but to jerk that people out from under you is illegal.
That's somewhat akin to the Good Samaritan Act, and I know they have that in the state of Washington, where if, as a Good Samaritan, if you proceed past somebody without stopping to even notify authorities or whatever, you can be fined. So it's kind of akin to that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And like what happened last night, west of Phoenix, you're at a point where it's deadly. Someone is in use of a deadly weapon. What happened last night was it was a complete setup against a DPS officer, your state trooper, received a call that there had been a rollover accident. It was a complete setup from what all the accounts that I've read and heard on the news. It was a complete setup. They called the officer, was dispatched, showed up at the rollover, and there was an ambush. He was shot in the chest. Accounts I've read, it hit his body armor, so he's going to be okay. Thank God. He was attacked after that by the perpetrator. A Good Samaritan stopped, rendered aid, and shot to death the assailant. And now he should be a hero. And in fact, his commanding officer, the officer's commanding officer, said if it wasn't for the citizen, the officer would probably be dead now. So, that's another case of the Second Amendment. If he wouldn't have been carrying a firearm, which in Arizona, you don't need a license, you don't need permission, you can carry it well, concealed or discreet or open. He saved an officer's life. Would he have been charged if he didn't? No. Because you're putting your life and limb in danger. But to assist the officer afterwards, yes, you are required by law to do that.
Right. And, it's interesting that you mentioned the Second Amendment aspect of it. Here in Texas, one of the more memorable things was what happened with Charles Whitman back in the 1960s with the University of Texas Tower. And one of the things that they don't talk about much anymore, because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want people to realize that your rights can be utilized to protect people. They don't want to encourage that. They try and say it's vigilantism, but it's not. it goes directly into the people being able to have the defense of others. You have self-defense and the defense of others. And in fact, in the UT Tower shooting, what finally stopped Whitman was a civilian that shot and killed him. Yes, there were sheriff's deputies in the area, but it was an actual private citizen that fired the coup de grace, so to speak.
Yes, and if I'm not incorrect, it was civilians with rifles in racks in their trucks who pinned Whitman down by firing at the bell tower continuously and drove him back from the edge of the bell tower where he could shoot other people that allowed people to go up to the bell tower to eliminate it.
Exactly.
So there's another example. If it weren't for the Second Amendment, more people would have died.
Yes. And it goes directly to conversations that you and Jeremy and I have had in the past about just why it is so important that we have these rights. These rights are there not just to be exercised, but they are there to help basically create this cohesive community of popular sovereigns. And it's very unfortunate that they're not teaching that in our systems of education or in the institutions of education. And I think that that's part of the reason why we have so much subterfuge in not just the media, but also in the education and everywhere else. It's just people don't know what their rights are. They're not being taught the Constitution, and there's really this sort of visceral hatred towards the Constitution. And again, to tie this into the idea of whether the police can just commandeer your vehicle, it goes into this notion of your right to property. And one of the things that Donald Trump has been belabored with before in the past was this idea of him using eminent domain, the Fifth Amendment's taking clause, to abuse it, basically taking it out of what it was originally intended to be, going down the lines of the Kello case and that other Connecticut case, which again skips my mind at the moment, my memory at the moment, but to use it not for public use, but to give it to another private citizen whom the government deems is providing a better tax base for the community and the government itself. And that to me is a gross misinterpretation of what eminent domain is.
Well, it's by bribery.
Yeah.
You know, you can bribe the government into taking property. No. You know, it's absolutely and unequivocally stupid to believe it. It's not just the educational system too. It's our own governments. I mean, how many times do you see the federal government make one law after another they have no authority to do? Well, there's silencers. Silencers there's no such thing as a silencer. Okay, it's a sound compression. It's a muffler. Okay, you put a muffler on a car or a motorcycle, it doesn't eliminate the sound. It just cuts the sound back. It shuts down some sound waves from reaching your ears. A muffler. That's all those compressors are. So suppressors are. It's ridiculous, and the Washington Post just put out a scathing attack on suppressors, saying, "Oh, you could take listen to this, guys, a high-powered .22 long rifle can completely eliminate the sound." They put that out yesterday. That a .22 long rifle, high-powered rifle, the sound will be completely eliminated. First of all, you know, 22 long rifle is the least of the powered rifles out there, and it's not a high powered, and even a suppressor, you're still louder than a BB gun. So now, it's not like the movies where you hear it, you know, you're still going to hear a pretty good pop. It just cuts back the sound. It actually protects your hearing. Europe allows suppressors. You can buy one over the counter. You don't need a permission, and yet in the United States you can't under the Firearms Act. What?
Yeah, it's
I
asinine.
think I think that case you guys were referring to in Connecticut, it's not just Kelo. Kelo is Kelo v. New London, but I think
Right.
there was one in West Haven, Connecticut. I
Yes.
think is what it refers to. Um, and the thing about Randy, with what you were saying, it goes back to not teaching the Constitution anymore. People are not being taught their rights. I think it goes deeper than that. People are being intimidated and oppressed and pretty much brainwashed into forgetting their rights. Those of us that know what our rights are and have learned what our rights are, that's slowly, in certain parts of the demographic and the population, people are being pushed towards the way of forgetting what our rights are because they're changing the language of the Constitution because they're interpreting it, which is strictly prohibited, and people are they're giving up their rights in forsaking them. They're giving them up and just saying, okay, well, that's not what our having our rights means anymore. So we might as well forget the original way and the true intentions of it, and they're adopting this new way, which is a bunch of crap.
Right.
Now,
And Jeremy, it goes to something else too, with respect to the personal property and everything. Again, this is why we say the Constitution is so important, and having this knowledge of it so important. When you look at the Fourth Amendment, it says that you have a guarantee against unreasonable searches and seizures of not just your person, but your houses, your papers, and effects. So literally what that's saying is there's a certain modicum of protection that is afforded to personal property as well. And of course, what we see is when you start trying to interpret the rights, which is expressly prohibited, as you mentioned, by the Ninth Amendment, that's when you have the court basically whittling away the rights. We know that with the Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights, for instance, they say that a drug-sniffing dog sniffing bags or finding something that triggers the dog, that's not technically considered a search. But again, is that literally not the way it's going to go? Because we know that there was other cases where they were sitting there trying to say if you used an infrared device to seek into a house to see if there was heat permitted or permeating off of the house, that was also not a search, and thereby they allowed the evidence in. Normally, under what is known as criminal procedure, if it is something that would violate the clear and concise language of the Fourth Amendment, it is fruits of the poisonous tree. In other words, it would be excluded from being evidentiary, being able to be entered into court as evidence. But you see, when you start whittling away at the rights, it starts to take away from things. And that's what they always do. They always start off with it being an incremental step. That's what the Fabians do. Because if you remember what the Fabian Society, that traces its origins back to 19th century Great Britain, started out as, it was this idea of naming themselves after General Fabius. General Fabius was the Roman general that finally defeated the Carthaginian general Hannibal. And he did it by a series of maneuvers, pulling Hannibal further and further away from his supply lines and into hostile territory, thereby exposing his flanks, and that's what allowed them to finally defeat Hannibal. Well, that's what they're trying to do with society. That's what they're trying to do with our rights. They incrementally move in a direction to weaken our rights, to strip, abridge, and belittle our rights.
Well, that goes right in with exactly what the definition of progressivism is. Mm-hmm. You're progressively, incrementally tacking and maneuvering things into a certain position in order to throw everything off balance, or to draw everything else out and expose it so that you can bring it out to light and try to expose it as, or brand it or label it again, falling right in with the propaganda of all of this, for something that people would be more accepting to. So, progressivism, Fabianism, it's the same thing.
And you get to the point, okay, blue lives do matter until they violate your rights. And unfortunately, what I've run into lately trying to teach the Constitution is people think that extra constitutional rights are protected by the Constitution. Whether it's marijuana, whether it's the right to drive, you don't have a right to drive. You have a right to movement. That right to movement means that you are not prohibited by the state you live in from leaving that state and going to another state and bringing your property with you. And the state you move to, cannot prohibit you from moving to that state and bringing your property with you. That's what the right of movement is. You don't have a right to travel. That doesn't exist. You can't travel anywhere you want to because you're blocked by private property most of the time. And that's where they get into the easement crap. And that's basically another taking, whether you have an easement of the property, and they can make a road through your property. It's ridiculous. It goes to the same bounds as seizing your vehicle and driving at over 100 miles an hour and chasing after a naked woman that you're responsible that she stole the car in the first place.
Right. And, the way that property law looks at your rights with property is like a bundle of sticks. And it goes directly to what you were talking about there, Nelson, in that you have the right to restrict people from having access to your private property. But the restrictive covenants and easements, as you're talking about there, do greatly start to cut into that. And then it kind of comes into this whole doctrine of civil forfeiture. We know that this has been utilized in such a way as to give the government extra clout and extra ability to come in and try and abridge and belittle your rights and take your property and use it for their own purposes, which again is extra constitutional. It is totally violative of the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the Constitution. And the reason that we dedicate so much time to this and deliver so much importance onto this is because if you look at Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, what is known as the Supremacy Clause, it clearly sets up a hierarchy in which the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Any other statutes, any other laws, any other treaties have to be enacted in pursuance of the Constitution. In other words, it has to follow the Constitution. And if it doesn't, then it is null and void, meaning that it lacks the binding force of law from the very beginning, what is referred to in legal parlance as void ab initio, void from the beginning.
Right. And you get to the point of private property. And I've had the argument over and over and over with people putting a no-gun sign on your business. You willingly open your business property to the ingress of the public. You don't have to do that. You're doing that willingly. Thus, if you put a sign in your door saying that no guns are allowed, that is the same as putting no blacks allowed, no Jews allowed, no Christians allowed, no people with blue eyes allowed, so on and so forth. Now, you get to the point where is it your property or you're not your property? Well, then they can't. The problem is they can't arrest you for simply going onto that property. It's not a trespass. You cannot commit trespassing by exercising your constitutional rights. Do you have a right to First Amendment to say anything you want to? No. But the fact is, if you say something that damages the property, the value of the property or the value of what you're selling or your ability to conduct business, no, you can't go in there and scream, this guy's, I don't like this guy. This guy's got blue eyes and brown hair and blah, 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 and you should shut him down or, scream epithets and so on and so forth. You can't do that. They have the right to throw you out of there. But they can't throw you out of there or call the police and have you arrested for trespassing just because you're carrying a gun. And that was my whole point. And the libertarians, who are all frauds, almost all libertarians are frauds. Let's set that down as a fact, because they don't follow libertarianism at all, as it was set out by Lincoln, that was set out by Wilder, that was set out by Rand, and so on and so forth. They basically, to each their own. Leave me alone. As long as you're not I'm not violating your rights, you should leave me alone.
Well, and that's when it comes down to the point of, what all three of us has always said numerous times, is that everybody's rights end where other people's rights begin, and vice versa. It's like our rights end where other people's rights begin. We're not going to violate other people's rights by what we think is the exercising of our own. It can't happen. It's almost like in the rule of physics, the two identical objects cannot occupy the same space and time. You can't violate somebody else's rights to exercise your own. Therefore, you're not exercising your rights. You are abridging others, but also forfeiting your own at that same time. It's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to go out and legally rape somebody. Well, you can't do that, because rape is illegal. But they see all these leftists, all these people that have absolutely no true concept of what the Constitution is and what it represents, is they want to throw in these extra constitutional things, like Nelson mentioned earlier, because they allow their emotions to dictate their logic.
Right. And the other thing that speaks to is the fact that we are a republic. I know that this is one of the things that has irritated each and every one of us, all three of us, is how it has been willy-nilly called a democracy. We are not a democracy. In fact, Benjamin Franklin defined democracy as two wolves and a lamb voting for what's for lunch. Who do you think's going to lose out each and every time? That's why our founding fathers stressed that we are a constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative republic, and that means that the rights of the sovereign individual are protected. But again, part of the compromise that was developed between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist during the Constitutional Convention, and it wasn't until December of 1791 that the Bill of Rights were actually ratified, but the Ninth and 10th Amendments were part of that. The idea being that you are protecting the rights of the sovereign individual, not just recognizing the rights of a majority. That is the difference between a republic and a democracy. Yet the way that popular culture has gone about this, and the way that the historical revisionists in our ivory towers of academia have gone about this, is to essentially say that there's no difference between the two. And, nothing could be further from the truth. And
the courts. And you have to include the courts in there.
I do.
How many times have you seen the Ninth Amendment misread? I mean, it says an enumeration of rights. Enumeration means all subjects in a group. All subjects. You can't have an enumeration. You cannot have a subject outside of that. That's what enumeration means. That means that all rights are enumerated within the Constitution. You want any other rights? If you want to recognize, and you might think you have rights, but they're not protected by the Constitution. So they might be rights, but they're not protected rights. You have inalienable rights. Your inalienable rights, and it connects specifically with the Declaration of Independence. Every single one of the 10 Amendments and every right protected by that 10 Amendments are included in the Declaration of Independence in unalienable rights. You have the unalienable right of life. You have the right of life, and only to lose that life by two means. That's if someone kills you in self-defense, or the government convicts you of a crime and sentences you to death.
Right, and that includes
the process of law.
Right. And it's what that goes to is part of those natural law tenets. It's really an attribute to our government and to who we are that's immutable. And it traces its origins back to the summer of 1215 at that muddy field in Runnymede when the Magna Carta was handed down. That was where we first saw a law of the land mentioned.
Right.
And it was an expression of those natural law tenets. Then that was further delineated in the provisions of Oxford at the time that Henry III was trying to essentially reign supreme. And Simon de Montfort had said, no, kings are not able to just do whatever they want. They have to have permission from the people, and it has to be through the law of the land. Now, of course, Edward I, being an emperor-type king, got rid of all of that. But what our founding fathers did was a logical extension, the next step of that, in saying that we, the people, are endowed with those fundamental and inalienable rights. And that's part of what George Mason had concluded when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia. That is the actual basis for the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, or the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So you see, this history goes all the way back to 1215 and is still applicable. Why? Because the natural law tenets, by their nature, are immutable, meaning they're just as applicable today as they were at 1215 as they are in 1782 and 87 and all the way to 235 plus years from today. It's because it surpasses anything. And that's why Jeremy and I, as well as you, Nelson, have mentioned so many times before that you cannot literally say that the Constitution is some quaint or antiquated document. Because it is rooted in the natural law, it cannot be based on any time. It is in perpetuity.
Well, it goes to, as well, with speaking with this, the preamble to the Bill of Rights,
mm-hmm.
which many people don't even know or believe exists, says right in the second paragraph, and I'll read it verbatim. It says, resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that the following articles be proposed to the legislatures of several states as amendments to the Constitution of the United States. All or any of which articles, when ratified by 3/4 of said legislatures, to be valid to all intents and purposes of the said Constitution, meaning that they are in pursuant, they carry the full weight and effect of the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. So when people want to take extra constitutional malarkey and attach it to this, or add it onto the Constitution, first of all, none of that's even legal or valid as binding law or standing law anyways, because they're not properly ratified in pursuant to the 5th article of the Constitution. So therefore, it's not even valid for people to even try and press those things.
Absolutely, and to the point that, and it was also Mason who wrote the original Bill of Rights and handed it to Madison. He wrote all 18 articles of the Bill of Rights. Now, it was up to Madison to rewrite. He rewrote them and presented them in the House of Representatives. But it was Mason who actually penned the original copy, and to the point that those natural rights and your unalienable rights that exist, that cannot be taken away without due process, are to the point that the right to self-defense and the means of self-defense are protected by the Constitution, and they cannot be violated. They cannot be infringed. And of course, you're talking about the preamble to the Bill of Rights. Also, it's read there where if the states ratified them, they had to follow them.
Yes.
Of course, we had the Privileges and Immunities Clause, and then the Privileges and Immunity Clause that further defined and stated that the states can't pass a law, nor can they enforce a law that violates your immunities under the Constitution, as you are immune from arrest and prosecution for simply exercising and enjoying your rights guaranteed by the Constitution. the right to keep and bear arms, the right to carry a firearm. They're talking about reciprocity. You know, that's all well and good, but you already have reciprocity and the privileges in you. So they're making a law that already exists, and has existed since the day that the Constitution was ratified, the original Constitution. It even goes farther than the Bill of Rights and the Privileges and Immunities Clause in the Constitution says the states will abide by the Bill of the Privileges and Immunities of the citizens of the United States.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Randy and Nelson, but Title 18 U.S. Code sections 241 and 242 have not been repealed as of this current time right now, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Right.
Both of those laws are specific in saying whoever or if any person engages in activity that violates, oppresses, intimidates, or deprives individuals of them exercising their constitutional rights are guilty of a felony.
That is correct.
There's privileges and immunities right there embedded in federal code, in federal law. Even though we have it in the Constitution as supreme law, it has been put into U.S. code kind of as a redundancy, but I don't think it's a redundancy at that point when they did it. It's more of a refresher to say, okay, here, let's clarify privileges and immunities. This is what happens when you violate somebody's rights or intimidate them.
It's an enforcement. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. You the privilege and immunities under Article 4 of the Constitution say the states will abide by the privilege and immunities of the citizens of one state shall be the same as all states. So you have the rights. You cannot be arrested or prosecuted because you are immune. That's what the immunities mean. And that further on, they outlined all the rights in the Bill of Rights and several others. I mean, the right for women to vote, your age, blacks can vote, so on and so forth. And then they further defined it in the 14th Amendment, where people think that was never ratified, which we went through today on the phone. That was absolutely and unequivocally ratified legally and constitutionally when the 14th Amendment was ratified by the states, no matter what anybody thinks, because Congress had the authority not to allow the Confederate States back into the Union if they didn't want to. And that's a fact.
Right.
So, I mean, it was...
I just want to take this time right now to welcome a couple of other individuals listening into the show. Octavius is back listening in. Welcome back, Octavius. And a stranger who has not been with us for quite some time, a couple episodes at least, Donna is back as well, wishing us a Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, Donna, and Octavius as well. And just wanted to kind of throw that out there and let everybody know that they're back on board with us.
Welcome back, folks.
Guys, California is on a rampage to violate people's rights. Not only are they doing that, they're committing one felony after another, allowing illegal aliens, known illegal aliens, to be issued a driver's license, which is illegal as hell under 8 U.S.C. 1324 to 5 to 6, so on and so forth. Giving any that aid or allowing the transport of an illegal alien is illegal. And then they went on the rampage to violate people's gun rights. It's incredible. And, I hope, and I will support President Trump when he does something right, and I will attack him when he does something wrong. Just like I do anybody else. I didn't vote for him, but you know what? If he does something right, I will support him, just like I would anybody else. So let's make that perfectly clear.
I think, Nelson...
The point is, though, Jeremy, is that I want Senator Sessions, if he's confirmed, the first thing I want him to do is start arresting people in California, because they have violated the civil rights and constitutional rights of one American after another. Millions of Americans' rights are being violated, and I want the idiots in California in a prison cell. And I don't want him to stop until he's got every one of them collected in behind bars. And if he does that, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And we're right there along with you as far as, giving credit where credit's due and praising individuals for doing the right thing. I don't recall if there was any opportunity to do that while Obama was president, or since his presidency. I think there may have been one or two instances, but it's
Osama bin Laden. That's the only one I could think of.
That's the only one I could think of, but it goes to the point of what it means to be an ultimate wielder of sovereignty and a free-thinking American citizen. It speaks to the natural law tenets of personal responsibility and accountability. The only way that any of us can hold anybody else accountable is if we're willing to be held accountable for our own actions first. We have to take responsibility for our duties and obligations.
Right.
And I know the three of us have no issues doing that.
Sure.
I know the three of us have no issues doing that.
Right. And what that gets to is that with every fundamental and inalienable God-given right we have, there couches with it an equally powerful duty, obligation, and responsibility. This is why we say that whenever it comes to our rights, it is the duty and responsibility of the people in their capacity as popular sovereigns to proactively maintain and safeguard those rights. And in fact, that goes right back to the language that's found in the preamble to the Constitution itself. And I know that I've reiterated this multiple times on previous episodes, but it goes to, we are securing the blessings of liberty not just for our generation, but for our posterity. That means for those up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. That's what's so amazing about the Constitution. That's the amazing attribute of the sagacity and near infinite wisdom and foresight of our founding fathers. It's that they innately and inherently understood that these rights rested with the people, but that in order to maintain those rights, the people had to be vigilant. The inherent distrust of centralized power and authority makes sense too. Because who was it that our founding fathers were fighting against in that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence? They were fighting against the centralized and consolidated power of the British Parliament and Crown. And basically what they had done is they had created this notion of virtual representation, where they were claiming that the American colonists had representation within the British Parliament by the fact that they were merely British subjects. But that's just not quite true. It was not true representation. And again, that is why our founding fathers developed a republic. And again, the Bill of Rights was written because the fear was that if we did not have those rights codified, that the government would eventually break away from it. And this is one of the areas where I think the anti-federalists were dead on. They said that government would eventually become corrupt, that government would eventually try to trample upon those fundamental and inalienable rights of the popular sovereigns, and boy, were they not far wrong. In fact, it didn't take long for the government to begin attempting to trample upon it. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, other than the Whiskey Rebellion and Shays Rebellion that actually brought about the Constitutional Convention and the overturning of the Articles of Confederation, was the Alien and Sedition Acts under President John Adams, our second president. There was literally an attempt at that time to to outlaw speaking out against the government. And that's what made the election of 1800, known as the Revolution of 1800, so contentious, is because they literally felt as though all of the gains that they had made in the American Revolution were about to be lost. And I don't think they were far wrong in that assertion.
Well, and even went to the first ruling into the one of the first rulings by the Supreme Court. Anyone that opposed Adams in the South, postmasters were going through their mail and destroying it. And there was a Supreme Court, I can't for the life of me remember which one it was, but the Supreme Court ruled that you can't go through that. That's illegal search and seizure. That's violation of their First Amendment rights to correspond. You know, we've had people say that your right to speak only is verbal language. No, it's not. It's a right to correspond with someone. It's the right to keep a journal. It's a right to have your own ideas and put them on the paper. That's not a publishing. That's not a newspaper. That's not the press. That's your own ideas, and you have a right for those. And when you cannot correspond with somebody and express your ideas, as long as you're not threatening to kill somebody with those ideas, or so on and so forth, commit a crime with those ideas, even if it says you aspire to overthrow the government because it's become illegal and unconstitutional, you have that right. I had somebody tell me I called for a wrong call for the overturn of the government. It is illegitimate under the Constitution. At what point, how many people have I asked this question, at what point does the federal government violate the Constitution to the point that the federal government is illegitimate under the Constitution? And at that point, that's exactly what the founders did, and the framers of the Declaration of Independence did. At what point we reached the point that they are illegitimate under their own declaration.
Right, and it
So,
speaks to Go ahead.
And that even goes to the fact of what you were speaking with earlier, Nelson, with places of business that are open to the ingress of the public, hanging a sign that says "No firearms allowed." Well, here's the thing: your right to keep and bear arms carries the full weight of a person's right to speak. Legitimately, that's like saying you can't bring your firearms in, but you can come in, but you can't talk. You can't say anything. You can't have a conversation with your family over dinner. You know, this is why I've personally boycotted several establishments. I won't give them my business. IHOP being one of them, to where they don't allow anybody carrying concealed, or openly for that matter, in their places of establishment. Well, guess what? Good luck staying in business when the crap hits the fan. In regards to the people saying enough is enough, you're not going to infringe upon our rights anymore.
Right.
You're going to get place of business, just go away.
It even goes farther, though, Jeremy. Can they enforce trespassing laws against those people? No, they cannot.
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely
they
not.
cannot enforce. They can't be trespassing. You cannot be trespassing if you're exercising a right. Now,
Right.
You have unalienable rights that go with you wherever you go. Your right to life does not stop at the end of your house or the end of your property. Your right to defend yourself does not stop at the
Anywhere
end of your property.
anywhere you have the right to be in public, your rights in full effect, the full enumeration of your rights are there with you. Because
And you know
to
what that
say
goes
otherwise,
to? You know what that goes to? That goes directly to the correct and proper interpretation of the Ninth Amendment, in so much as none of
Exactly.
the rights enumerated there can be utilized in a way to abridge, belittle, or take away or encroach upon the other
Disparage.
rights that are enumerated within the Constitution. And again, this goes directly to one of the points that Nelson made earlier, in so much as the way that the Ninth Amendment has not really been properly discussed, not properly, quote unquote, interpreted. But again, it's the Ninth Amendment that literally states that the Constitution cannot be interpreted. But when you have the Supreme Court sitting there handing itself power in violation of the way that the Constitution was originally designed and developed, with the 1803 case of Marbury versus Madison giving them the ability to have judicial review, which means that they can sit there and interpret the Constitution, that is directly violative of the tenets of federalism, which is the proper relationship of the governments of the several states and the central government, but also in the way that power is to be utilized and exercised. Basically, the federal government, by its innate design, its inherent design, was to be limited, meaning that if it was going to properly exercise power, it would have to trace that back to a power that was specifically enumerated to it by the language of the Constitution itself. In Marbury versus Madison, and then later in Hunter's v. Lacey, Martin v. Hunter's Lacey, and some of the other cases that were in the early court, the court was giving itself power that was not enumerated to it. And the fact that we have stuck with that, I think, has started this downward spiral that we've been encountering in century after century, and then decade after decade, and generation after generation, where the government just keeps expanding past the proper scope and application of government as mandated by the Constitution itself.
Well, let's look at the Affordable Care Act and the rulings by, the Supreme Court with both of that, the opinions from John Roberts. John Roberts, in his second ruling, basically said that it was legal to apply a tax, which we have established as being a bill of attainder, which violates Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 of the Constitution. But he went so far as to say that because it's a tax, the IRS themselves can actually penalize people. And see, I've told individuals that I am extremely pissed off that when I filed my taxes for the past 2 years, I have not been penalized. And people say, why would you want to be penalized by the IRS? It's because that would give me just cause to sue them for damaging my rights, for damaging me because I'm applying an illegal impost. They can't do this. And the point is, the courts delegated authority to a governmental body, an agency, that they don't have any authority to do in order to enforce that. So, at what point now, again, pardon me?
It even goes to the state. It even goes to the state.
Absolutely. Absolutely it does.
The Ninth Amendment and the Tenth Amendment. People keep misreading those two amendments so badly it's not even funny. On the Ninth Amendment, all rights are enumerated within the Constitution. Outside of that, they're not protected. B, under the Tenth Amendment, all anything that to put it in layman's terms, to be able to define it, what it says, not to interpret it, define what it says. There's a difference. The Tenth Amendment clearly says anything the federal government is not delegated the authority to regulate. The states, if they are not prohibited the authority to do so, should go to the states and the people. Well, the fact is, the states are prohibited a host of things from regulating and from making laws. Anything that are privileges and immunities, they are prohibited. Any of the rights that you are immune from arrest or prosecution, they cannot make a law to regulate that.
Let's bring up another one. Let's bring up another hot point on this: imposts. And you've been railing about imposts. I've been railing about it. Randy's been railing about it. They have all these new imposts, these gasoline taxes and cigarette taxes that they're imposing on people at the state level. Those are illegal. They are unconstitutional. In fact, I would argue as much as saying that they're a bill of attainder. Could they not be?
Jeremy, you get to the point that The Constitution clearly says in Article 1, Section 10, that the states cannot enact an impost on imported goods. It also means that states that interstate commerce are imported goods. You import a good from one state to another. Those are the Supreme Court has ruled once, even with the Dormant Commerce Clause. They've ruled in their own rulings that anything comes from one state to another is an imported good. Now, you have a whole host of items: gasoline, diesel. You have alcohol. You have cigarettes. You have internet services. You have telephone services. Those are all interstate commerce, and they enact. Now, listen to this. The state of California, I was telling you today, they collected $93 billion in taxes in 2015. $62 billion of that were imposed. And that's why I'm telling everybody, and they don't want to believe me, but this is going to happen. There will not be an Article 5 convention of the states, because the states have collected, and they've imposed, collected, and spent imposts that they're not allowed to do without consent of Congress. And even if they are consented, anything outside of their collection or the inspection fees, they must turn back over to the Treasury of the United States. That's trillions of dollars by each state. Mm-hmm. You don't think that these idiots in Congress are going to give up power? They will use that post clause against the states. You can guarantee that will happen. They're already talking about it. King is making freaking rumblings about the impost clause now. The states will not be able to enact an Article 5 convention because Congress will bankrupt them first. And then the federal government will take over every state.
Right. And again, that just goes to violate the whole notion of the proper tenets of federalism. You know, people have forgotten that what federalism means. And there really is a proper relationship between the governments of the several states and the federal government. And unfortunately, the way it's taught in law school, even, this idea that the Bill of Rights before Section 5 of the 14th Amendment didn't apply to the states, that is just ludicrous. Because again, the states agreed to be subjected to the Bill of Rights when they ratified it in December of 1791. That's literally what they agreed to take upon themselves. So there's a lot of misinformation that is just out there at all levels of education when it comes to the proper scope, application, and implementation of the Constitution. And it's unfortunate that that happens because it's really not that difficult of an idea to put forward. I mean, you don't need a rocket surgeon. You don't need Dr. Ben, I'm a victim, get me a new suit Carson to figure this out. And I don't think he could figure it out anyway because he'd be too busy looking for that new suit. But literally, it comes down to we the people are the ones that exercise the fullest amount of power. The Constitution is a social compact or contract. The parties to that contract are the people and the government. The terms and conditions are included in that contract. That's your Bill of Rights, and that's the limitations on government. And so whenever you break away from that, it gives you the ability to petition the government for a redress of grievances, and that's why that attribute is included in the First Amendment. You know, everybody knows of freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, but they don't ever talk much about the petitioning of government for a redress of grievances.
I did. Remember when I petitioned the government for redress of grievances? Let's see, I do specifically a registered letter with a cease and desist order, a legal cease and desist order to Dianne Feinstein, which stated the violations of the Constitution and the violations of federal law in passing or even attempting to pass a gun ban. And what happened with that? Oh, yes. Within hours of them receiving that certified letter, I received a phone call threatening myself and my family. That's what happens when you address grievances for this government anymore. Mm-hmm. They'll threaten you.
which is a bad idea to do with our first Air Marshal Nelson Ward, as we oftentimes refer to him as our nuclear option.
Right.
Come and threaten me.
Yeah.
Bring it. I'm waiting.
And here's the thing. It tells me that the government no longer thinks of itself as being public servants. They no longer believe that their job is to serve us. They think it's the other way around. And that is the exact and polar opposite of the way that our founding fathers had originally intended and designed for this government to work. And that goes almost directly back to the point that started this whole program of the ability of law enforcement officers simply to commandeer vehicles when it's also something that was of their own fault and creation, and thereby saying a way of just allowing them to have carte blanche with your property. It's not the case, but unfortunately so many people are just unaware of their rights and are unaware of the proper constraints on government that it just is beyond the pale here. It's to the point now where I would say that our founding fathers don't recognize or wouldn't recognize what our country has become.
They would recognize it being worse than what Britain was doing.
Right.
Even worse. They would be aghast and ready to wage war against them like they did their own government. But, yeah, I mean, guys, do you remember the movie with Clint Eastwood and Sandra Lock? And he was supposed to be transporting Sandra Lock. Eastwood was supposed to be transporting Sandra Lock from Las Vegas to somewhere here in Arizona. And then he commandeered a bus by gunpoint. Remember that one? They were taking bets whether he would make it there or not, and the police officers didn't want, the police department didn't want her to testify against them, and so they tried to kill them. Remember that? Remember that movie?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he commandeered the whole entire bus and threw everybody off. He committed carjacking is what he did. I mean, that's the same as carjacking. That's one of the offenses. That's one of the, in almost every state now, carjacking is a freaking, it's a freaking offense where you have the right to use deadly force to prevent.
Well, yeah, it's felonious.
Because it's like taking over your house. It's absolutely like taking over your house. It's within, and as for the infrared and the dog, I'm going to go back to address that and get a chance to. You know, if something permeates outside of your property, I think that would give them probable cause to at least investigate. But as for the infrared thing, that's not permeating outside of your property. Thus, that should be stopped wholesale. So if you smell marijuana walking out of somebody's car, and when I was a deputy, that's probable cause right there. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's probable cause, guys, because you have evidence right there. You are smelling evidence. It's like smelling evidence is the same as seeing evidence. You know.
Well, it falls under the plain. It technically falls under the plain sight rule in the legal field. You know, it's a similar example is if an officer is on foot patrol, happens to walk by an establishment and sees, illegal activity taking place, they have the authority to intervene and act on that right there at that point because it happened right in front of them. Now, if there's illegal activity happening that is behind, let's say, a 6-foot-tall privacy fence that they can't see through, but it sounds like there's something might be going on, they don't have the right to go in there, and otherwise they're criminally trespassing.
Right, but if they can smell it, it lets them
smell it.
Sure, that's pretty much undeniable evidence that there's marijuana present in that and being used in that property. Thus, you have probable cause.
Correct.
Now, whether you can bust into that violates the warrant clause, the due process clause of having warrant.
I would think, and many people would make the argument that there's evidence of evidence there, to where, again, it's kind of like, well, here's a scenario. You have an individual or even an officer happens to, again, on foot patrol, here's somebody being assaulted. A woman screaming, being assaulted. Now, could it be that they have their television up too loud and they're watching, a movie that's playing out in the movie? Possibility. But they're acting on good faith at that point in time. And if they happen to kick in the door and there's a man beating a woman or a woman beating a man, by whatever the case is, that justifies the circumstances for them to do it at that point. They're not going to take time out to go and get a warrant to search, see if criminal activity or anything like that. It's just not going to happen.
Well, it gets to the point that someone's life is in danger is more important than
absolutely, and that falls right in line with the tenets of what law enforcement's obligation is when they take that oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution. It falls right in line with protect and serve. A lot of people think that, well, your job's to protect me from a crime being committed against me. No, law enforcement are an after-the-fact entity. They protect and serve. They protect the people's rights from being any further violations after the crime's committed, or during the commission of a crime at that point in time that happens in front of them.
Right, and as the Constitution reads, there's a reason that life, liberty, and property are set in that order. Life is more important than liberty. Liberty, because you can't have liberty without life, and liberty is more important than property because you can't have property without liberty. So that's your property rights do not come before someone's right to life, and your right to liberty does not come before someone's right to life.
Right, and this is one of the reasons why we say that you can't just pick and choose which attributes of the Constitution to apply, that you cannot just selectively enforce or selectively talk to the Constitution. And, that's one of the things that the left and even some of those on the right have done with respect to it. And I think the biggest example of this is the no-fly, no-buy, and if you mention due process, we cry bill. Because, again, that they were trying to sit there and say that if you are put on the no-fly list, then you cannot buy or procure firearms through firearm dealers. And what they were trying to do there is to say, well, you see, they're clearly terrorists, and therefore you got to deny their rights. No. The issue of due process is going to come up each and every time, because that is one of those fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And in fact, there was Joe Manchin, or Senator Munchkin, whoever the hell his name was, who said that due process is killing us. No, jackwad. What is happening there is that due process is working as the Founding Fathers intended it. They had designed the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to prohibit the government from doing exactly what our government is attempting to do there. And the more that they engage in that sort of thing, is the more they are trying to obfuscate the truth and are trying to strip our rights, which they are not allowed to do. And you see, again, that's why the Constitution is so important. It's why we say that you need to foster this fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the Constitution, because that's how you defend yourself. That is how you preserve your rights. That is how you prohibit the government from becoming rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate.
Well, see, that
goes even farther, though. Jeremy, for a second, it goes even farther, though. We have the pro-pot groups throwing a fit. The federal government says that if you have a medical marijuana card, you can no longer purchase a firearm from a federal licensed dealer. Now, does that violate your right to keep and bear arms? No, it does not. You have the choice to have that. You don't have to have a medical marijuana card. You don't have to use medical marijuana. Now, not only federal law, But every single state in the United States says you cannot be in possession of a firearm under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, you cannot purchase. All it does is limit the purchase from a federal firearms licensed dealer. And the point is, it's on saying that's a violation of their Second Amendment rights. You don't have a right to smoke pot. There is no right in the Constitution. There's no right to say you could put anything in your body. It's not there. It doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So thus, it's not enumerated. Thus, it's not protected. That's
Right.
Whether you like it or not, that is a fact. Now, it's up to the states. It's not prohibited to the states. So the states can say that. But as we work now, you have to be a federally licensed firearm dealer to sell a new firearm, and you sell used firearm, and you're prohibited, as the courts have ruled and rightly ruled, under what the law says. Now, I'm not saying whether the law is constitutional or not. I'm saying that as the law reads, you cannot buy a new firearm from a licensed dealer. It doesn't keep you from owning a firearm. It doesn't keep you from buying a firearm from a private citizen. And they're throwing an ungodly fit about that. Well, if they'd read the Constitution, they would understand that actually this is kind of constitutionally protected in some aspect.
Well, it goes back to, again, this extra constitutional rights. I think that being able to, engage in the use of drugs is a right, but they want to have all their rights. And what this actually boils down to, Nelson, is just like that individual Munchkin, or whatever his name was, and all these individuals that are, right to pot and all this other crap, this nonsense. I refer to them all as Baldwinites, taken from Roger Nash Baldwin, because see what they're doing is they're wanting to be able to have extra constitutional rights, but have their constitutional rights at the same time, and work in tandem with each other in order to destroy the Constitution. That's exactly what it is.
They're not doing it. They're not doing it consciously because they don't know any better. They're stupid. It's
exactly.
Like,
and it's our job to point it out to people.
Yeah, it's because people are stupid. Like Kierkegaard said, people will believe a lie if they want it to be true, or they're afraid it's true, and then they're that much easier to fool.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And you see, part of the reason that we say property is so important is, again, what was the pursuit of happiness based off of if it was not John Locke's original idea there of life, liberty, and property? That is where it came from. It was expounded upon to mean that. And of course, we see so many efforts to try and restrain property. And I bring property up again because it ties back to this idea of people being able to encroach upon your property, or to be able to commandeer a vehicle against your use or against your permission, and to try and sit there and say that they can take your property and use it for non-public purposes as well. Again, all of this ties into the government is not supposed to be able to, with carte blanche, be able to step upon the rights. But as you guys were mentioning there, it's limited to the rights that are enumerated within the Constitution. Nothing else. Nothing more, nothing less. And so it's got to be that we operate within the purview of the Constitution. And again, that's why it's so important to know about it.
Well, Article 6-2 or fight.
Yeah.
6-2 or fight is what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes to the states, too. The states are just as they're just as guilty, and they're just as criminal in doing it. Whether it's California, whether it's in our own states. I mean, you look at Texas. Texas doesn't have an income tax because they have some of the highest imposts of any state in the country. So that's how they're able to operate. Whether it's the high property taxes, or or so on and so forth. But they've also got the highest imposts in the country. So it's amazing too. When Arizona has a higher cigarette tax than the state of California, there's a problem there, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you can go to California and buy cigarettes, when you have a right to use cigarettes, do you think you have a right to use it? Not really. You don't have a right, but you have the right to purchase it. It's not illegal. It's not like marijuana. You have a right to purchase it. Do you have a right to use it? Not really. But you do. States don't have a right to tax it either. They can impose a sales tax on it, but this is a tax for movement, just like gasoline's a tax. They tax on gasoline, and then you hear them whining and complaining. Oh, well, how do we fix the roads? Find some other means. That's what it's easy to tell them that. Find some other means, because this one's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And that's
what are they going to do next? Tax birth?
Well, they'll tax air. They'll try taxing anything. Look, basically, think of the tax that they had with the Obamacare thing, where you are essentially being taxed for not purchasing something. That is a tax for just existing. That is unprecedented. That had never been seen before in our country. Yeah, it is. It literally is.
Anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the world. I have never yet found any place in the whole entire world in the history of mankind that they've been able to tax something for not doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a tax. It's a punitive tax, which is a what?
Bill of
It's a punitive tax.
A bill of exchange.
Not only, it's a penalty.
Yep.
It's a penalty. A punitive tax is a penalty by the very definition of punitive tax. It's punitive. That means penalty. And thus, you cannot be forced to pay a penalty without what?
Due process.
Due process.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back as to why. Going back as to why.
What? What are they going to replace it with? Why don't they replace it with enforcing the Constitution? The states cannot prohibit you from going across state lines and buying something and bring it back to your state.
Exactly.
How many times have they ruled that? He'll be Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous.
And again, it goes back as to why people think I'm crazy when I said that I'm pissed off that I was never penalized for filing my taxes for not having health insurance.
Mm-hmm. It goes even farther, though. Even to the states. The states are violating the Constitution every bit as much. We have Supreme Court rulings, and they said, "Oh, well, that was over whether Jehovah's Witnesses could be charged a tax for selling their paraphernalia, or Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, whether blacks could be stopped from having a march or getting together." The same thing with firearms. That's the privilege of
and what those rulings have done
is equal to the other.
And what those rulings have done, they have created a different classes of people, a protected class, which is unconstitutional because the rights apply equally. It's equal protection under the law. You cannot apply the rights to one group of individuals and prohibit them from another.
And you cannot apply one part of the Constitution above another.
Exactly.
You cannot apply one right above another.
And that
and
goes
following
directly
under
back.
the section of the law.
That goes back to the Ninth Amendment. See, again, this is a very critical part of the Constitution that is not really discussed properly. And that's why we belabor the point here. It is because that attribute of the Constitution is perhaps one of the most significant. It's why the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were able to come to the agreement. It was actually the Federalists that wanted to have the Ninth Amendment included because they were afraid that the enumerated rights would be utilized in such a way as to infringe on the other rights that were included there. And they wanted to have that protection because they thought that by having it reduced to writing, that it would work against everything else. And so that is an example of where compromise is useful. But it's not useful when you try and say that you are going to compromise your rights away, or you put rights up on the bargaining table, because then again that brings back the Ninth Amendment. That's why it was brought in. You don't compromise with those who are attempting to strip and deprive you of your fundamental and inalienable rights, because those rights are non-negotiable. But people don't seem to realize that.
Even goes to the 10th Amendment, where the states are prohibited violating those rights. And they think, the false Federalists think that the states can do anything, the carte blanche to do anything they want to. But the fact is, and you even have people say that the Constitution only has authority over the federal government and no authority over the states whatsoever. How many people have we run into in our time? What's his name? Bob, what's his name? That we used to have. The one we, I mean, he's trying to teach him was like, poor fellow is trying to like teach a log how to speak. He doesn't seem to understand the states are prohibited just as much as the federal government is prohibited. If it's not prohibited to the states, then they can regulate it. Just like marriage.
Otherwise, it falls onto the people. And when it falls onto the people under the 10th Amendment, that authority that is not delegated to the federal government and prohibited to the states by the same right are reserved to the people. That authority is our ability and obligation of self-responsibility and duty to exercise our rights and to maintain them. That's what that boils down to. And people don't understand that. They don't want to understand that because it's too burdensome for them. It pulls them out of their safe spaces to where they have to, I don't know, grow up and face reality. They just don't want to do it. They want everything done for them. And that's all done because of moral relativism, indoctrination, revisionist history, and political correctness.
Right, and it's even where Mike Broomhead here in Arizona, who set in for Glenn Beck. I like the guy, but he's wrong on the point. He's against the people being able to put in an amendment to the state constitution here in Arizona, because he says it violates a Republican form of government. Well, the point of the 10th Amendment is clear. It's under the consent of the people. So the fact is that the state constitution says that the people can vote on propositions to amend their constitution. And the 10th Amendment protects that of the people.
Well, I would think that this Arizona state's constitution would protect that as well, as far as going at. So
it does.
I know Michigan's constitution does.
Yeah, it says the people can vote to amend the Constitution. It's a proposition.
Absolutely.
And almost every state in the country. There's only a few states I think of, and I think it's the unicameral state of Nebraska is the only one that you cannot have a proposition. It has to go through their state legislature to amend the state constitution. I mean, even California. Unfortunately, California, they're trying to now get rid of the because they fear Bloomberg and they fear the vote of the people that will violate or pass laws that'll violate the Second Amendment here. Well, the fact is they're not allowed. No state can pass a law or even amend their constitution to violate the federal constitution.
Right.
So those laws would be void from the second they were freaking passed.
Sure. Because again,
the federal Constitution prohibits that.
That violates the Ninth Amendment, and that violates the whole notion of the supremacy clause. Again, that is where it would be
Absolutely.
subsumed, because you cannot pass a law that is directly contradictory to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the Constitution. That's why it says that any laws that are enacted in pursuance of the Constitution, well, anything that would limit the Second Amendment cannot be passed. Now, what a state government can do is they can afford more protections to a right than the federal government does, but they cannot limit, they cannot abridge, and they cannot encroach upon the rights of the people.
Well, that's what they've done in California.
Right.
I mean, they've clearly infringed on how many rights? They've infringed on the point you can't speak now.
Well, Nelson, I remember, Nelson, your amicus brief you filed on AB 962. I read it.
Right.
I believe Randy has read it as well.
Yes, I have.
And if it was not for your amicus brief on AB 962, AB 962 would have went through.
Right.
It was
the
NRA.
They've done now. They've done since now. Now you have to register with the federal government. We're not federal government, state government.
Well, you don't live in California anymore, so of course they're going to pass it. They're like, oh, he doesn't live here anymore. We're going to pass it now.
Remember what happened when I filed an amicus brief. I remember what happened when I went to the Tea Parties and we were going to get constitutional carry put on as a proposition. I was attacked. Mercilessly.
You were attacked.
Unmercifully.
You were attacked. I remember, Nelson, you were attacked by many of the same individuals within that Tea Party.
Mm-hmm.
Not the Tea Party. No, it was Calguns and the NRA.
Yeah.
Attacked. The people in Calguns who were supposed to be fighting for the Second Amendment right of the people of California came in and attacked me because they said flatly that we're going to say what happened here, and we're going to say who actually can have a say in this or not. That's no better than the assholes that were running the state of California.
No, it makes them complicit in the illegal violations of the Constitution is what that does.
Yeah, we're
absolutely complicit.
Where has it gotten Calguns now?
Nowhere.
Now that I haven't been fighting for them and doing their job for them, the Michelle Brothers law firm there in Los Angeles couldn't do on their own because they didn't have the idea of how the Commerce Clause actually worked. They tried to use some illegitimate freaking truck law that I'd never even heard of, or anybody else, and the judge had never even heard of. And when I wrote wrote the amicus on 962, clearly stating the Privileges and Immunities Clause under Shuttlesworth and under what's the other one? I can't think. It starts with an M in Pennsylvania. And that's what we want under privileges and immunities. And that's where have you seen any, except for Alan Gura, who I just saw on C-SPAN talking about how he uses the privileges and immunities and Shuttlesworth and the other one on both Heller and on McDonald v. Chicago. Yeah, he used the privileges and immunities and trying to make people understand. That's what their main. And then the point that the argument they actually won, they didn't make a real argument under due process. They made it, and only they made it under the privilege and immunities, and only one Supreme Court justice got it right, and that would be who, guys? The one that always gets it right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you know, it just goes to show. It just goes to show that when you utilize the Constitution in its proper format, and you know the Constitution. It literally empowers you to have the ability to stand up to these efforts to encroach upon your rights. And that's part of what we have always been dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. It's this ability to empower you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, with the ability to stand up for yourselves, to stand up for your rights, to ensure that the government does not encroach upon, belittle, or besmirch those rights. And again, that is the beauty of our system. This idea that we as a nation and a people have the ability to be self-determinate. You know, you've got those two pillars. You've got self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem to give you self-determination. That was something that had never been tried before. That is something that our founding fathers did that was revolutionary, it was new, and it is why our Constitution is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the entire course of human events. That means no one else on Earth has ever made as steady, stable, secure, or free, or honest a system as we have. But to keep it honest, we have to be proactive, and that is always what we've said. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, she will not commandeer your drinking glass. She's just there to pour you some alcohol. As always, I'm your captain, Randy
And she
Wright.
tries.
Yeah, push her out of the plane. I'm your captain, Randy Wright. I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also want to thank you, Nelson, for being our special guest this evening. We really do appreciate it.
Wow.
And as always, folks, I'll have Jeremy tell you a little bit about the Cafe Press account before we close out, and then we will see you next time. Jeremy, take it away.
Okay, well, the Cafe Press account, as mentioned numerous times before, novelties, gift ideas, so on and so forth, those drinking glasses, they are very real, folks. They are there. Shot glasses and drinking glass varieties. And I know Nelson doesn't drink, but I'm willing to bet that if he had one, he would have no problem sporting it as a first-class passenger logo or a traditional logo. He'd have it chock full of root beer, I'm thinking. So, go on over to the Cafe Plus account where you can find it on our dashboard for our Twitter account and whatnot at handle at Radio Aviation X.
EX. Mm-hmm.
EX. Yes.
Yeah,
and you can find the departure board there, our Twitter account, so on and so forth. Take a look at the Cafe Press account and let us know what you think, and shoot us any ideas, comments, or anything like that.
Sure. Thanks again, folks. We'll see you again next time. Please do take care.